Welcome to the Deep Wealth Podcast, where you learn how to extract your business and personal deep wealth. I'm your host, Jeffrey Feldberg. This podcast is brought to you by Deep Wealth and the 90-Day Deep Wealth Experience. When it comes to your business deep wealth, your exit or liquidity event is the most important financial decision of your life. But unfortunately, up to 90% of liquidity events fail. Think about all that time and your hard-earned money wasted. Of the quote-unquote successful liquidity events, most business owners leave 50% to over 100% of the deal value in the buyer's pocket and don't even know it. I should know. I said no to a seven-figure offer and yes to mastering the art and the science of a liquidity event. 2 years later, I said yes to a different buyer with a 9-figure deal. Are you thinking about an exit or liquidity event? Don't become a statistic and make the fatal mistake of believing the skills that built your business are the same ones to sell it. After all, how can you master something you've never done before? Let the 90-Day Deep Wealth Experience and the 9-step roadmap of preparation help you capture the best deal instead of any deal. At the end of this episode, take a moment and hear from business owners like you who went through the Deep Wealth Experience. Alan Wozniak is the former president, CEO, and founder of Pure Air Control Services, Inc. in Clearwater, Florida, which is an environmental and HVAC mechanical firm which was established in 1984. Pure Air Control Services has divisions in building sciences, environmental diagnostics, laboratory, and building remediation groups. In 2021, Alan successfully managed the sale of the firm to a Fortune 500 company, RPM International. Pure Air Control Services is a provider of indoor environmental services in over 19,000 facilities covering 900 million square feet, both nationally and internationally, and is one of the largest full-services, comprehensive, healthy building indoor environmental firms in the nation, with heavy experience in government, healthcare, higher education, lower education, commercial, and entertainment markets. Some of Mr. Wozniak's many accomplishments include leading the firm to Inc. 500 national list 4 years in a row, a 370% growth in the past 5 years, the Tampa Bay Fast 50 fastest growing private firms, the Tampa Bay Business Journal MBE Top 25, the National Hispanic Business Top 500, Frost & Sullivan Product Differentiation Innovation Award for its solutions for improving indoor air quality, and providing the management and oversight of the M&A process to realize a 17.5 EBITDA. Mr. Wozniak has authored numerous articles on indoor air quality and is a Newsweek magazine expert author. In addition, Mr. Wozniak has been a guest lecturer on many webinars, podcasts, workshops, and indoor air quality symposiums. Welcome to the Deep Wealth Podcast, and I have a friend of the Deep Wealth community. You heard all about Alan in one of our earlier episodes. We'll have a link to the show notes and to the episode itself. And today we're going to do something that is really going to benefit you, because there's that saying, if your health is your wealth, on the personal side. That's terrific. But let me ask you this. It's probably a question no one asks, and we need to ask more of it. When it comes to your business itself, the health of the business, in other words, the building that you're operating out of, or if your employees are doing remote work, the health of the homes that they're living out of, what's that all about? And where is that? Have you even asked that question? Have you even thought about that? What you're going to hear today is going to be startling. And again, here at Deep Wealth, we're all about preparation and ensuring that you have a healthy workplace that really promotes people living the absolute best that they can and feeling terrific and not coming down with metabolic diseases, which is all the rage these days. So Alan, welcome back. It's great to have you with us. And for some of our new listeners who haven't heard the other episode that we did, and again, in the show notes, I'll put a link to that. Why don't you give us a quick story behind the story of what got you to where you are today? And then from there, we can go into the health of buildings and the questions that nobody is asking.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I started 30 years ago in business as a mechanical contracting firm, and we were one of many. In fact, I believe at the time we were one of 800 HVAC contractors in the county alone of which I live in, and that's Pinellas County. The difficulty was the manufacturers, we were a Carrier deal at the time, and Carrier makes a great product, but we were one of hundreds of contractors all selling the same thing. And there wasn't a differentiator. And I got very distraught with that industry very quickly because everybody was beating their heads against the same thing. And the manufacturers, to their credit, were their motive operandi was to move boxes. I wanted to be different. So I saw a need, and the need was the condition of HVAC systems deteriorated very fast in a short period of time, primarily that of the air handling systems. And this is both commercially and residentially. So I saw the condition of the systems were poor. I took some samples, had them analyzed at an environmental lab. And to my surprise, there was a lot of pathogens, a lot of bacteria, a lot of fungi, things that were not good and not healthy. And so I had a couple doctors of friends of mine's, allergists, immunologists, and I approached them. I said, hey, if these conditions were in your patient's home or business, would it affect your patient's outcome positively or negatively? And said, absolutely, in a negative way. We studied 30 years ago. And so I felt I checked with EPA and OSHA, NIOSH, World Health, and we realized shortly that there was a big need, but it was untouched, the blue ocean, if you will, of indoor quality. And so I took that, I went from that red ocean, which was basically a cutthroat, just grind it out kind of business. And I went into the blue side and the blue ocean area, covering issues that clients really wanted. In fact, my first questions to the client wasn't about what type of air conditioning do you want? Does anyone in your family or anyone in your business suffer from allergies? Does a condition that exacerbates those, if they were positive, does it exacerbate while they're in the building or home? And oftentimes it was absolutely yes. So my next question was, if I could change that outcome, if I could create a positive outcome with good indoor quality, do you feel that would benefit you? And the answers were unequivocal. So we focused on healthy buildings and not air conditioning. We still sold air conditioning, but the healthy building or the healthy home was the end result. Our cost to build a healthy building or a healthy home oftentimes was 2, 3, 4 times greater than providing them a conventional HVAC system. But they wanted that. They wanted the healthy building. They wanted the health. This was 30 years ago, mind you. We sort of pioneered the industry. And even more recently, I sold the business a year ago, stayed on just until a couple months ago. The focus was healthy buildings in the last. So we basically had a building science team, we had a accredited lab, and we had an HVAC division. So we did it all in-house, and we studied over 19,000 buildings covering over 900 million square feet over the years. So our database continued to grow at an exponential rate. We were looked at as the go-to company for healthy buildings, especially post-COVID, where it hit a lot of people directly, everybody. I don't think there was any one person not affected. And it sort of was, premonition-wise, but we had the foresight to think people want good air. And another fact is that we spend 90% of our times indoors. So you take a person at the age of 50, he will have spent 45 years inside, whether it's your home, business, workplace, mall, whatever. 45 years of his 50 years has been inside. And the fact that we breathe 2,000 gallons of air per day, that's the equivalent of, what was the number I had estimated? It's the equivalent of over 730,000 gallons of air per day. And that 45-year span, that's 32 million gallons. So the question is indoor important? Absolutely. As much as so as drinking pure, clean water.
So, Alan, let's pause here for just a moment, because big picture wise, you have painted quite openly a very scary picture of what's going on out there. But at the same time, for most of us, It's invisible what's going on. We don't know what to look for. The signs are everywhere, but if you don't know what to look for, they're going to be a blind spot for you. It's like a skeleton in the closet that we spoke about in your last episode with us when you're selling a business. This is a different kind of skeleton in the closet. So when you have an unhealthy building, when you have a sick building that's making the employees sick, even making the business owners who are listening to this podcast sick, and we don't realize it, we're just chalking it up to other things. What are some of the health symptoms that we're seeing? And maybe you can take us from on the lighter side to the very serious side of the kinds of health conditions that result from breathing in toxic air and being in a building that just isn't healthy.
Yeah, great question. I think the underlying crux of the situation, like COVID was found to be an airborne virus. And initially, CDC would claim it's a surface thing, clean your touching spots and so forth. But we realized that as an environmental consulting firm that no, that was wrong, because we knew the virus molecularly was zero 0.03 minus micron level, microscopic, and it stays suspended in the atmosphere. We, as mechanical designing engineers, designed HVAC systems to change the air 4 to 10 times an hour, depending on the building type and condition. So you can imagine that microscopic particulate. Now, just call it a virus, but it could be dust, mold, bacteria, pathogens, endotoxin, mycotoxin. They're all microscopic. And so they're all floating in the air, but they are moving throughout the ventilation system at a rapid pace. In 15 minutes, the air in your room will have changed entirely. You don't see it, but it entirely changes. So whatever pathogen that is, it's causing the recirculation. Some of the symptomology, I mean, when you sneeze, wheeze, cough, you typically have breathed a foreign allergen. And the foreign allergen could be numerous of things, from dust to dust mite to fibers and fiberglass fibers to mold, bacteria, endotoxin, mycotoxin, Legionella, numerous of things that your body is reacting to that. And we all have sneezed. So we know that's that mechanism that creates the understanding that, hey, I breathed something bad, not so good. I'm going to try to react to it. So the symptoms can be from a headache to malaise to a lethargic to upper respiratory irritation to asthma, emphysema. It covers the whole wide range of variable symptoms. A doctor who's a friend of mine, he's a thoracic heart surgeon. He realized after 3,000 heart surgeries that he was treating the symptom and not the cause. And that's what happens in buildings. We treat many, not Pure Air, the company I used to work with that I built, but many companies treat symptoms. An example, we had a building, university dormitory, may have shared the story with you before, but the story was such that they called us in. They had a condition, a microbial condition in their dormitories, and they called us out. We studied the building, and we found out what the problem was. And the symptom was the visual mold on the walls and books and chairs and desks. That's the symptom. But that didn't cause the problem. So we had to identify the cause, and the cause was a super negative pressurized building. The building basically sucked for all intents and purposes. And that's what caused partly the mold condition. But also, in addition to that, the ventilation system was not maintained well at all. And there was heavy microbial contamination to the point where the face of the coil was 50, 60, 70, 80% clogged, meaning that no air was passing through it. So the microbial conditions, the humidity conditions were exacerbating. So those are the two fixes. And the university client said, well, yeah, that makes sense. We just bought these 1,000 air purifiers. We're just going to put those, we're going to clean the walls ourselves, and we're going to put these air purifiers in, and hopefully it's going to go away. I told myself, well, quite frankly, it's not, but you do what you need to do. But we're not suggesting that. We're suggesting you fix the problem and not cover it with a Band-Aid, which in this case, I would consider that a hemorrhaging condition, and you're putting a Band-Aid on it.
And Alan, so I suppose that part of the issue here is for us as a business owner. I mean, what you're talking about is really out of sight, out of mind. The HVAC system is probably locked away somewhere. Maybe we haven't even been there for years. So we have no idea what's going on. And even if we did visit that room, we probably don't know what we should be looking for unless it's something blatantly obvious. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. It's not a sight of mind. It's sort of, again, it's like a heart, and a doctor's, as a thoracic heart surgeon, he doesn't see the heart. We don't see the air handling. The air handling system is in the bowels of the building.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody really understands it or sees it other than the mechanical guy who on occasion visits the system. To their credit, they do the best they can under the conditions that they're given. And they can't make miracles out of, they may need 10 people working for them, but they got one or two guys. And they're basically a glorified fire station, just putting out fires. It's the best they can do. Filter changes is a secondary mode of operandi.
Wow. So let me ask you this. So as a business owner with my building, or even at my employees at their homes, because again, post-pandemic remote work is increasingly popular. It's here to stay. It's not going away. Would there be some questions that I should be asking myself, my employees? Hey, can you tell me, are you feeling this or that? And if that is the case, what would that be?
Yeah, the basic questions would be, are there cold spots? Are there hot spots? Is the humidity and temperature being monitored routinely? Do members of the staff or family suffer from allergies? Are the allergies exacerbated while in the building or at home? And what kind of symptomology are they experiencing? Is it upper respiratory? Is it asthmatic? What is the symptom that they've been experiencing while at work? Typically, if 10 to 15% have similar symptoms, let's say you have call it 100 employees, and if 10 have similar symptoms, there's a good chance, just from a superficial perspective, that there could be a problem. That doesn't mean there's a problem, no. But there could be, and that's why the diagnosis, like a doctor-patient relationship, that's why there's a high correlation there, as well as our businesses. There's a high correlation of the diagnosis, understanding the person metabolically, health-wise, and understanding the building from a building health point of view. And those are critical components, because if you don't understand them, you just can't let me put in an air purifier. That was the problem with COVID. Billions of dollars were spent, but they were spent on a product-centric mechanism, meaning, well, buy an air purifier and the air purifier should clean it. If you have a hemorrhaging home or a hemorrhaging building, it's not going to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. And that's the high percentage of buildings and homes that suffer today. I'm not saying don't put in air purifiers. Absolutely, they're great. But you can't put that Band-Aid on a hemorrhaging condition and expect results.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask you this. It's not necessarily your area per se, but you've probably come across it. In terms of actual costs to businesses of people being sick, employees missing work, perhaps the health plan is now in overdrive, trying to pay for prescriptions and doctor visits. Any sense of what this is costing us?
Absolutely. In fact, Harvard and EPA have done studies, amongst many others. And the cost of a business it costs about $200 a square foot. That's the cost of a person, the people cost. So if you have, for example, a 50,000 square foot building, if you take times 200, that's a 10 million payroll that you have for that business. And the quick equation, rough numbers, if you can improve, and it can be shown, if you can improve 10% by improving productivity through improved indoor air quality, and the fact that it's showing that you care for the employee's health, is that you're talking $1 million, bottom line, affecting that business and the profitability.
Wow, that's staggering.
You take that times the breadth of the businesses out there. Oh my gosh, it's an amazing number. And those are hard facts. They're actual data-driven information. I'm not sure the relative correlation for homes, but the homes would be very typical. If you can reduce doctor visits, if you have a child who has asthma and they're missing 10%, 15% of school because their asthma episodes are increasing while they're at home or at school, that is causing a learning disability or an ability to learn due to the fact that they're having to go to the doctor, missing school and so on and so forth. And you see the rampant amount of some kid is sick at school, and that kid gives it to this kid, and this kid gives it to their parents and their kids, and all of a sudden you've got a massive amount. So understanding the indoor quality is really a critical condition today. With COVID and without COVID, it's a critical component.
So you've outlined the cost, you've outlined some of the symptoms, and obviously we can take a look at that as a business and go into that area, but clearly this is not our area of expertise as a business owner. So what do we do? Because we shouldn't be going through this on our own. How do we get help, and what are the questions that we should be asking?
The best way to get help is through a building scientist group. They typically will study buildings like a doctor would a patient. And they're going to go through a series of questions with the business owner, understanding the building, the age, the height, the condition, any prior events, water events or otherwise. How is the HVAC system operating? What's the data on the mechanical systems? If the HVAC system is a building lungs, that needs to be studied. You have to go in and traverse the ductwork, the air handlers, take samples, evaluate them, find out what the baseline conditions are, monitor the indoor quality for allergens, for conditions, VOCs, temperature, humidity, PM1, PM2.5, PM10, a whole range of things to understand the baseline conditions. Again, they go back to the health side of a patient. Doctor patient is he's going to take a blood sample, he or she, and he's going to tell you are low or above the baseline condition based on your metabolic health and based on your glucose levels, your HDLs, your LDLs, your triglycerides, et cetera, et cetera. And you're in good health or you're not in good health, and here's why. And that's what a good building practitioner will do for a building owner is tell them where they are, where they need to be, and how they need to get there from a prescriptive point of view. And not just, oh, here, I own an air purifier. Here, do this, and this will make you better. That would be considered malpractice in the medical community.
Got it. Okay. And Alan, outside of your company, which you sold, but is out there doing some tremendous things, and we'll put some links there in the show notes. The listeners can always call there if they want to have someone come and do an inspection. Generally speaking, though, what would be some of the questions that we should be asking to make sure that we have the right kind of building inspector who has the experience, the systems, and the know-how to get things done?
Jeffrey, great question. And like you would if one was going into surgery and you had to have surgery, some minor or major, you typically are going to get 2 or 3 opinions. That would be my recommendation. And the same thing, and you would check the background of that doctor. Make sure he's not some third world physician that he's just starting practice tomorrow and he would love to perform surgery on you. You want to make sure that doctor has a great background, that has the experience, that has a lot of successes. And the same thing you would want to do with a building practitioner, building consultant, is check their backgrounds. How long have they been in business? How many projects have they done? What's the square feet? How many buildings have they studied? What have been the results of their studies? Not necessarily the reports of the studies, though that wouldn't be a bad idea, redacted, but find out what do they typically recommend or some of the conditions and what's the follow-up. If I have a problem and you have a solution, what is your typical follow-up to make sure that you're keeping my building from a healthy point, that I don't run into the same problem next year or the year after that? And so, series of questions asking the credentials. Are they certified consultants in the indoor environment? There are a number of certified consultant conditions. Are they HVAC licensed? Because if you're not HVAC licensed, typically you can't even get into the ventilation system. So if I was a PE, for example, a professional engineer, I wouldn't necessarily be able to, and I'm doing indoor quality studies on the side, I wouldn't necessarily be able to evaluate your ventilation system because may not know. That could be a structural engineer. I don't know HVAC systems, and I'm not licensed to do that. So you have to have HVAC licenses. You have to have licenses for certifications, in some states certifications to test for things such as allergens, molds, bacteria. And then the lab that you use, I've seen such hack jobs in the past that you want to use an accredited laboratory. This industry today, as it has been in many, many years, really isn't heavily reviewed by the federal government. There's no standardization at this point, unfortunately.
Hmm.
So you could be sending your samples into, Bomb's garage lab, and the analysis could be done in a very haphazard way versus, say, an accredited lab that has to go through weeks of credentialing and heavy expenses to really make sure that the staff is credentialed, the equipment's credentialed, the lab itself has the credentials, they're maintaining their temperature, humidity, and their incubators, their microscope, their equipment. Should be what's called ISO 17025 credentialed. That's their equipment standardization to make sure they're all calibrated effectively. You would think, well, doing an air sample is an air sample, but if you send it to some whack lab, then you're junk in, junk out.
Isn't that amazing? Here we could be doing the right thing, asking the right questions, picking an inspector for the health of the building who comes in and does everything. And unbeknownst to us, they're sending it to a lab that really isn't qualified or set up to do the proper types of analysis and testing.
Absolutely. There's a lot of that out there. And you wouldn't send your blood sample to a non-accredited pathology lab. That would be unheard of. So that would be the same thing with a environmental sample. You wouldn't want to send, and that would be illegal. But in the case of indoor air quality, you have to ask the question because there's not a standardization, federal standardization that says you have to send it to an accredited lab. So you could be a quack lab out of your garage making, money, but you're not really providing good quality, definitive science, behind it.
And one of the things I'm hearing is when we're looking at a lab and we're asking someone who we're going to bring on board to look at our building or our home, hey, can you tell me about the lab? Are they accredited? And if they are, who are they accredited with? We've got to go down to that level of detail to make sure that we're covering all the bases.
That's correct. There's a number of accreditations, such as A2LA, Industrial Hygiene Association. There's CDC Elite, which is for accreditation for Legionella laboratories specifically. There's New York State Lab accreditation for Legionella. So there's a number of accreditations that are very critical to make sure that the components that they are addressing the indoor quality in a positive way. And a quick example, we studied a 2 million square foot building this past year. And we did the baseline study and the ventilation assessment, and the building hadn't been reoccupied yet, but they were getting the process. So one of the suggestions through their industrial hygiene and our industrial hygiene department was, let's study, the water's been sitting there. The building's been sitting there for a year or two. To rule it out, let's study the water to make sure that we don't have any potable water issues, and specifically Legionella, because that's where typically Legionella is in. So we did water sampling, hundreds of water samples, and it came back that 10% of the samples, plus or minus, came back positive.
Wow.
So we circumvented a potential catastrophic. Can you imagine a 2 million square foot building being fully reoccupied, and then all of a sudden a Legionella outbreak occurs? So being proactive and studying the water before reoccupancy was really critical, and it saved them potentially hundreds of millions of dollars by doing. Now, all they had to simply do is shock the water, purge it, clean it, and do it again. And we went back and retested it, and weeks later, and it was fine.
Wow. A disaster in the making that was avoided by asking the right questions, having a professional like yourself on the scene. Now, I imagine, Alan, if I'm a listener, I'm saying, you know what, if I owned my own building, sure, I could ask those questions, bring the right people in, but I don't. I'm leasing. So in that instance, have you had situations where tenants have approached your company or approached you and said, hey, how can I speak to my landlord in a way that's going to be intelligible? I'm not going to be offending anyone, but I can make sure that we're working in a safe environment.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a big issue with landlord-tenant relationships. And we have found that the responsibility typically falls on the shoulders of the tenant. And it depends on the triple net lease kind of thing that the tenant-landlord relationship is and the contract. But for the most part, they're responsible for the indoor air, not the landlord. So now, with exception, if there's a roof leak, and the roof leak causes damage to the interior of the building, the offices, then obviously that the landlord would have to be responsible. Even with the HVAC system tends to lie on the side of the tenant oftentimes. So, they can't fall back and say, well, it's the landlord's responsibility. Sometimes it is, and oftentimes it's not. So the bottom line is if you own that, if you have a 50,000 square foot building and you're leasing, you're paying the $10 million payroll. That $1 million potential savings is yours, not the landlord's, it's yours. So, paying attention to the indoor quality as a business is really a sensible way of approaching this. Saying, hey, regardless of my relationship, if I own the building or not, I need to know that I've got good indoor quality. And oftentimes buildings have good indoor quality, but they just don't know it. So if you can study the building and then get a clean bill of health and get some kind of recognition for it, that's something you want to share with your employees. Hey, we had the building studied. The air quality is great. We're good. And the same thing with being able to monitor the building conditions. There's monitors that we would put in buildings. In fact, we did this in entire campuses. We put monitors in every building and we monitored the conditions, all cloud-based monitoring. So we were literally could be hundreds of miles away, monitoring the building health of buildings from temperature, humidity, CO2, PM1, PM2.5, PM10, formaldehyde, dew point, all simultaneously. And in fact, we got to the point where we were able to build into the program where there was, say you had a monitor, you went into the lobby of a certain building and there was a TV monitor there. We could actually put the aggregate of that particular building's sensors into the TV monitor that would state that the building indoor quality today is good, whatever conditions, and it would show the aggregate numbers. It wouldn't go down into the details, into the weeds, but it would give you an aggregate condition saying the building's healthy, in essence. If it wasn't, then you would know otherwise.
Well, it's interesting. In business, we have key performance indicators, KPIs, and perhaps this is a KPI that we should be having in our business because it's the health of our most valuable asset in the business, our people. And without our people, there's no profits, there's no growth, there's no business. So, why not have this as a KPI? So let's go now from a little bit of the obtuse to the very specific. So Alan, I want you to imagine now that I've brought you into my building or into my home, and you're going to be doing an analysis of the overall health and safety of the air quality. What are you doing exactly? How long does it take? What does that look like? What's involved with that?
Typically, when we do a building assessment, we're going to, it could be anywhere from hours to days. If the 2 million square foot was probably an entire month, full-time with half a dozen people. But typically, what we would call a building health check or a baseline study, it typically would range in the day to maybe 2 days, typically. What we would look for, we would assess that your temperature, humidity conditions, your surrogate data, CO2. We would look at your particle counts, your PM1s, your PM2.5s, your PM10s, VOCs. We would also look at things like your biological load, your microbial load, fungal, bacteria. We might, depending upon the conditions, we might look at the allergen load, meaning the dust mite content, the cockroach allergen, because these are allergens that cause allergic reactions in those who are immunocompromised. So understanding a lot of the details is really critical, because if you just did one or two samples in types, you very well could be missing out on the true problem if there were one in a building. I got a number of examples I could share with you, but those are the kinds of things. And then ventilation, the building pressurization, the ventilation cleanliness, how clean is clean. We know by studying thousands and thousands of buildings, we know what a healthy building looks like, what a healthy building condition is. Like a doctor would on a blood sample, he can immediately tell, okay, you're way off or you're right on target. And that's the same thing we can do with building study with the science that we have today. But you can't just take a sample and say, a surrogate sample and say, well, everything looks good. Until you get into the bowels of the building, you're not going to know that. And that practitioner really needs to be able to effectively assess those conditions to make those kinds of decisions. Otherwise, you're really not going to give the client the data that they need to make effective prescriptive decisions.
And Alan, it sounds like from what you're saying, it's that old saying, garbage in, garbage out. So, In my mind, I may be saying to myself, we change the air filters all the time. We're on top of that and we keep the building clean. But unbeknownst to me, maybe in one of the vents, there's some hidden mold or other kinds of things. All the air cleaners in the world, all the air filters in the world aren't going to help in a situation like that. Would I be correct with that? It's what I don't see. It's what I don't know. That's where the danger is.
Absolutely. What you don't see can hurt you. And that is true with ventilation systems. If they are dirty, and unfortunately, many are, again, we've diagnosed these. We've gone in and accessed them and cut into the bowels of these buildings. And many of them are not clean. Many of them are, but you don't know that until you diagnose it. And you can't put in systems in place such as, let's call it UV light, or these are the most common things today that people just randomly install because they might be cheap or they're quick. If you have a ventilation system that's nasty and you put in an air handling system that's, stalactites are growing from the air handler and a coil that's 50% found, putting in UV light in an air handling system and putting in ionization in an air handling system are totally of waste because you haven't fixed the problem. It's like taking aspirin for cancer. It may make you feel better for an hour, but it's not going to get rid of the problem. You have to diagnose what the conditions are in order to effectively mitigate them in a way that is all it's done. It's not, well, we don't want to guess at this. It's like science and medicine. You don't want to guess at medicine. You want to know as a patient, you want to know, hey, doc, what's wrong with me? How do I get better? And what's my path to get there? And that's the same thing with buildings. A lot of times I've seen reports that are just terrible. And they're just not on any a trajectory of a positive outcome. As an accident waiting to happen. It's a university kind of setting. Most companies would have gone in and said, hey, just clean the mold and you're good. And 6 months later, boom, it comes back with a vengeance. And that's what happened often and all the time.
And so really what I'm hearing is these, I'll call them these add-ons that you can put in. And even outside of the ventilation system in the office space itself, if I put in these air purifiers or these air filters, it sounds like it's a Band-Aid that probably doesn't even work as a Band-Aid in the first place, that you really got to get to the root cause. And if we think of a building like a body, it sounds like the vents and the whole ventilation system, that's like the veins in the body carrying the blood and everything else. And if we got a problem in the veins, if there's a blockage somewhere in the body, that's going to be an issue. If there's a contamination in the venting system of a building, that's going to be an issue. And whatever you put after the fact isn't going to be able to cope, particularly when you have mold or other just deadly and very dangerous kinds of substances. And Alan, to put you on the spot for a moment, back of the envelope, or maybe you have the numbers, if you were to visit 100 buildings and you had no idea, was it healthy, was it not healthy, but coming out of an inspection of 100 buildings, how many of those buildings had serious health issues?
Great question. I would say based on our data, and again, it's not 100 buildings, but 19,000 buildings, it'd have to be in the 70% range. Not necessarily unhealthy, but very borderline. Some are very unhealthy to the point of they should be out. We never closed a building down because there are ways to effectively mitigate problems in buildings. Because once you close a building down, and that's happened, we've been involved with projects that were closed that we were involved with, not us being the consultant, but others. And quite frankly, the psychological impact is tremendous. How do you know that building is healthy today? You close a building down for 6 months and you bring people back in the building. What's the first question they're going to ask? How do we know the building's healthy? It was closed due to a poor health. So what did you do differently? And how can you prove that it is in fact healthy? So yeah, it's critical.
So the confidence of the people gets rattled. They're not quite sure, should I go back or not? But let's take a step back for a second. And for the listeners, did you hear that out of 19,000 buildings, we're not talking 19 buildings, we're talking 19,000 buildings. Alan, you're saying that 70% either had serious issues or were borderline about to become serious. That is staggering.
It's a large number, unfortunately. And the result, why is that, is the question. Primarily, we've gone through a 20-year deferred maintenance. Facility managers are not given the budgets to effectively manage their buildings. Cut costs, the first thing to go in a budget-cutting economic condition when you have a downturn in the economy, The first thing when budgets start getting cut, we'll cut maintenance. I've been involved with cities that have 100 buildings, 200 buildings, and they've got a staff of 2 or 3 for the plumbing, the electrical, and the HVAC. The best that they can do is, I call them glorified fire marshals, because all they're doing is they're putting out fires. Mrs. Smith calls, my temperature's too hot. I got a water leak. I got a roof leak. I got this heat. I got this. And they can't even change filters, let alone deal with a proactive program. And that's what these buildings need to be involved with, is a proactive building assessments and maintaining. Once you understand the health of the building is good, then maintain that health. It's like you go through say the Dr. Ovadia had a heart patient. He's not going to suggest, go back to your normal activities of being a couch potato and eating bad foods and not exercising. He's going to tell you, no, you need to do this. I need to monitor you. And the same thing with buildings. Once you have a building that's healthy, keep it that way by managing it and monitoring it and educating. We would present information to hundreds of janitorial staff of school districts, of county government buildings, because they're in the trenches. They see this stuff. They're the ones not necessarily causing it in an indiscriminate way, but they could be part of the solution or part of the problem. Now, part of the problem could be they're vacuuming the carpets all day long. They're using non-HEPA filtered vacuum cleaners. It's interesting. We've measured the particulate from vacuum cleaners. They look, you could have 2 sets side by side, and they both look powerful. They both look pretty good, pretty healthy, pretty sturdy. And one could be spewing out 80,000 particles. Whatever's in the carpet, they're just throwing right back in the air. 80,000 particles. The other one's 25. It's 99% more efficient, but they look the same. So are you using the right housekeeping protocols? Are the chemicals you're using non-toxic? Now, that's another huge issue, the VOC off-gassing from all these chemicals. These gazillions of gallons of chemicals are being used in buildings. What's the toxicity level of the chemicals that are being used? And are they safe for the indoor environment? The general housekeeping, the filter changes, the issues with regard to maintenance of the building. What are the protocols? How are the protocols being enacted? Are they being thorough? Who's watching them? Who's managing that effort? I equate a lot of an example to, say you had a lawn guy for your lawn, and you said, hey, I want the grass cut. But your idea is you want the grass cut and you want the weeds trimmed and you want the bushes trimmed and you want other things done. But you say, I want my grass cut. But in your mind, you're thinking, it's the grass. That's all part of the whole thing. I want the grass and the sidewalk trimmed and so forth. He goes out and he gets hired. He cuts the grass, and you look back at it. Why did you trim the bushes? And why did you trim the sidewalk? And why did, if you're not specific, if you don't have a process and specific way of doing things, how do you know, how can you prove the success of what that's being done? So that's one thing we would do, is look at, what is your process? How is it being enacted? Is it effective enough? What's the effectiveness of your vacuum cleaners? Are you using harsh chemicals? Are they healthy chemicals? How are you scrubbing we've seen literally propane tanks being used in buildings, hallways, to scrub. These were not necessarily approved processes, but to speed up the process, instead of using electric brushes on the carpets or hard floors, PVT tile, they would use propane gas powered machines, and the carbon dioxide level would just go crazy.
So it's a whole ecosystem, really. It's not just the HVAC system per se. It then goes into cleaning protocols, and really it goes back to the kind of company that you're bringing on board who knows this, that can help through education and having the experience with this. And so here's what I'm getting from you, Alan. I mean, the not great news is 70% of buildings, give or take, and you've done this for 19,000 plus buildings, likely have an air quality issue that's affecting the health of the employees and people who are in the building. But the good news is, if there is an issue, what I'm hearing from you is, more times than not, the building does not have to be shut down. You don't have to create fear and panic with people. You can deal with the issue behind the scenes. And I suppose this is where out of sight, out of mind is a good thing, because no one's the worse for it. And you could fix the problem, and things are terrific on a go forward basis. You've got to the root cause. You now have systems in place to make sure that the building is kept healthy. Am I correct with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of things that can be done from a building identification that can identify those conditions of the indoor quality and that can be managed in an effective way. And again, like I said, a lot of times they're minor things. We had a client that had an endotoxin, which is a bacterial metabolite, as a result of a water event years ago. They had done mold surveys, and the mold surveys came back negative. It was minimal. We went out as a consultant and we did our study, and we said, wait a minute, time out. You have a endotoxin issue that's now exacerbated in this College of Nursing in this building. And there were many symptoms. The issues were a lot of students were getting sick. So we said, here's what you need to do to fix it. And one of which was, I told you about the vacuum cleaner, the endotoxins were in the carpets that were being airborne because of the release from the vacuum cleaners. Simple, basic thing, but nobody knew about it. And the molds weren't there, or the bacteria weren't there in any abundance, but the metabolites of those were. So understanding those kinds of minutia conditions are really critical to really, you're a sleuth. You're really getting into the bowels of the building to understand, why is this building doing what it's doing? And is there a cause-effect relationship? It's the heart patient kind of thing. The heart didn't just go bad, typically. It's because of lack of exercise, poor eating habits, couch potato, just a number of other things that is causing a bad metabolic health. In fact, Dr. Avedi would tell you that 88% of people are metabolically unhealthy. We say 60-70% of buildings are not metabolically unhealthy, but that are potentially unhealthy only because they're not being maintained in an effective way due to oftentimes that deferred maintenance issue that happens across the country. And I'm talking not just homes, but businesses to universities, to colleges, to hospitals. Hospitals have been some of the most horrendous conditions. Once you look at the hospital and you go into the hallways and they're like, oh my God, this is clean as clean. You can eat off the floors. You go back to the bowels of the buildings, oh my gosh, this is not good. We've seen some just horror stories, conditions that even to the point where in some hospitals, when the surgeons found out that we were cleaning ventilation systems as a result of high infection rates that were occurring in the hospital, HAIs, hospital-acquired infections, that they would tell facilities, look, I won't perform surgery unless the company who you're working with, and in that case was Pure Air Control Services, had cleaned the ventilation system, because the ventilation systems were very unclean. From an operating suite point of view, the OR suite, you think, okay, this is pretty good, but you start traversing the ventilation system and you found, oh my gosh, this is not good. In fact, a JCO report, a Joint Commission study, if they went into those facilities, they would shut buildings down, hospitals down. That's why I'm very skeptical, because we've been in hundreds of thousands of these things, that I want to know, what is the credentials of the doctor? What's the credentials of the building? How healthy is the building?
Sure. And, we don't talk about this in business in general, and we'll briefly touch upon this. And then, Alan, we're going to need to start wrapping up as we start to bump up against some time here.
Yes.
Unintended consequences. I mean, a horrific thing that could happen for a business owner. You own the building or you're leasing, but you're still responsible, is down the road, people get sick, fatalities happen, and then they come back and they realize that it was the air quality. That's a liability that's on your hands. Or what if you're having a liquidity event and a future buyer listens to this podcast, or they just know better? They test the air quality, they test the building, and they say, you know what? Wanted to buy your business, but having your employees breathing and effectively living 8-10 hours a day in a toxic building, we don't want that kind of liability. We don't want a future lawsuit or a class action suit because you didn't take care of business. Forget a liquidity event in this instance. Really get your air quality in order so that you do have a business, that everyone is healthy, that they can be running at their optimum. I mean, we didn't even go down the rabbit hole of, if you have the sniffles or if you have allergies or you're getting sick all the time, what does it do to your performance? Well, the listeners can only guess how bad that is on a day in, day out basis.
Yeah. Today, you really should prove that you have good indoor quality. In a liquidity event, we've done studies in real estate investment transactions where the entire building is being bought and sold. And the new owners want to know, am I buying a bad building? A healthy building, because that can have to have it studied afterwards and have to correct the deficiencies if there are any. It could be in the millions of dollars. So they want to know, do you have a healthy building? And we've done a lot of due diligence studies for owners and real estate transactions we studied the entire buildings, hundreds of millions of square feet, that would identify what is the condition of the building. And if there are deficiencies, here they are, and here, and then you can use it as a negotiation tool if you had to say, it's like having a building inspection. This is going into more depth, healthy building inspection to make sure that the air quality conditions have been maintained and are kept. Because if I bring people in, they get sick, guess what? They're going to sue the building owner.
Absolutely. And just before we start going into wrap-up mode here, I can just imagine you test the air quality and now you display that to existing employees, to future employees that you're interviewing, in a liquidity event, to your suppliers, to your clients. What a way to stand out from the crowd. And if down the road employees are leaving you or you don't hire somebody, you better believe that wherever they go for the next job, they're probably going to be asking, hey, how's the air quality here? And they'll always think of you as the business that cares about its people. What better way to put literally your money where your mouth is of, hey, yes, we have a medical plan for you. Yes, we care about you. But really look at this. Where you work in the building, we've gone to the minutia, and the air quality gets a gold star. We are a safe place to work.
Yeah, that's a great point, because people today, post-COVID, more so than any other time, they want to know, am I working in a safe environment? Mm-hmm. And not what is the health of the building? And so if you can walk into a building and see a monitor that says, hey, the building air is good, that's all I need to know. I don't want to, but if half the staff is coughing, wheezing, and sneezing, I'm going to start asking questions. Wait a minute. Why is everybody having these allergic symptoms while in this building? Is there a problem? So you have to, being proactive, really, yes, there's a cost to it, but it's inconsequential to the value that you receive, especially that example, the $200 a square foot, the 50,000 square foot building, the $10 million annualized budget, and the 10% savings, $1 million savings. That is huge. And it affects the bottom line to the business. And it doesn't matter what the size is. You could have a 2 million square foot building, 5 million square foot building, a 10,000 square foot building. It's all relative. It's all the same.
And if you're looking for that ROI, you're having a liquidity event, you want to bump up your profits, look no further than what we're talking about with Alan, with something you probably never would have thought of, the health of the building through the air quality. So Alan, as we begin to wrap this up, and again, we could have gone into so many different directions, but you've given some terrific insights, the questions to ask, what we should be thinking about, and a much smaller level for our own personal homes, what we should be doing. You're no stranger to this last question as we wrap it up. It's a tradition here. Every guest, whether they've been on once or a few times like yourself, that we ask this question. So we're going to stay with the tradition. And it's that thought experiment of the movie Back to the Future, where you have that magical DeLorean car. You're going to get a second kick at the can here, Alan. And it's okay if you give the same answer, or maybe we'll give a different answer. Let's see. You're going to keep us in suspense for the next few moments. But that DeLorean car can take you to any point in time. So it's tomorrow morning, you look outside your window, and there it is, the DeLorean car. It's waiting for you. The door is open for you to hop on in. You can go to any point in your life. Alan, as a young child or a teenager, an adult, what are you telling your younger self, Alan, in terms of life lessons or wisdom? Or, hey, Alan, do this, but don't do that. What does that sound like for you?
Yeah, again, another great question, Jeffrey. I believe the last time I shared with you was probably, maintaining your education. Don't sidestep that, because that's a critical component. But growing up, I always had a strong belief in myself. I would bet on myself. I did lawn services. I did paper routes. I did construction jobs. I'm talking young, 8, 9, 10 years old. Did lemonade stands, all that stuff that I knew that at a young age that I wanted to do something different. And being an entrepreneur showed that side of that story. In fact, a quick anecdote, one of my jobs was a gasoline attendant, and I attended cars to pump up gas. This is when they had full service. And I was anxious to have a job. I was probably 13 years old, and I wanted to make money. And so I saw this help wanted sign. I was probably 13. And I think the age to be a employee is 15 at the time. So I fudged that number. He asked me if I could pump gas and change oil. I said, yeah, I've done that before. So I said, okay, you're hired. So I went through probably 10 cars and everything was perfect. The 11th car was a Corvette. The Corvette had a gas cap on the back side of the car over on the top of the trunk. And so I'm pumping the gas, made sure customer service wise, Corvette, beautiful car. Didn't touch the hose on the car because I don't want to scratch it. I want to make sure he felt good about what I was doing. So he called, the owner of the car calls me over and said, hey, your son checked my oil in my car. So I run over there, checked his oil. By the time I was checking the oil, I heard this cascading effect occurring in the back of the car. Unfortunately, the gasoline was pouring out of the back. The owner of the car gets out. The owner of the gas station comes running over, looks at me, stares me right in the eye and says, Alan, you're fired. Get out of here. You used a number of choice words. So I think what I realized then was I hated that. I had to go home and tell my mom and dad that I got fired. I felt bad. It was a terrible experience. And at that point, it set my tone to say, hey, I don't want to ever get fired. So therefore, I need to own my own business. So I could fire myself, I guess, but the chances of me getting fired are going to be less than if I work with somebody and arbitrarily just getting fired, even though I was doing a good job. That sort of, as a young boy, taught me some lessons to get out there, do your own, bet on yourself, and make sure that you always work hard and do the best you can do.
Love that. Some terrific life wisdom and advice, and go the extra mile and just be that difference out there. Never treats you wrong, always puts you in the right direction. And Alan, one last question as we wrap this up. And again, in the show notes, we'll have everything. And from the last episode, we have your LinkedIn profile, and we'll put that in there again. If someone is interested to have their building for the air quality to be looked at, where can they turn? Who or what would you suggest that they could do?
A company who, again, I sold we shared in the last episode, part one is Pure Air Control Services, and they're a great company. Their website is www.pureaircontrols.com. You can get all the information online there, schedule a meeting, a free consultation, initial consultation with one of the building consultants, and they'll walk you through that process. Again, a great company. I helped build a tremendous organization, really the best in the business, and we were a pioneer. 30 years ago, we pioneered this industry, making it the best today. So I'd encourage you to call them. They work nationally. They have national accounts, and they can help in any facet, whether it's building sciences, the lab side, the mitigation, et cetera. And they can assist a business owner. Or my number, I'm sure, will be there as well. Call me up and I'll direct them to the right person.
Well, again, we'll put that in the show notes. It'll be a point and click. And what I really have enjoyed about this episode, Alan, is we're taking, and pun intended, we're taking deep wealth, both from the business level and the personal level, and we're really extracting it from this episode. You're looking after yourself because, again, your health is your wealth. You're looking after your business, and that $200 a square foot, which could be a savings and bump up the ROI and the profits. It's a win-win all the way around. It doesn't get any better than that. And on that positive note, Alan, we're going to wrap up this episode. And as always, thank you for taking part of your day and spending it with us on the Deep Wealth Podcast. And please stay healthy and safe.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. Have a great day.
The Deep Wealth experience was definitely a game changer for me.
This course is one of the best investments you will ever make because you will get an ROI of 100 times that. Anybody who doesn't go through it will lose millions.
If you don't have time for this program, you'll never have time for a successful liquidity.
I mean, it was the best value of any business course I've ever taken. The money was very well spent.
Compared to when we first began, today I feel better prepared, but in some respects, maybe less prepared, not because of the course, but because the course brought to light so many things that I thought we were on top of that we need to fix.
I 100% believe there's never a great time for a business owner to allocate extra hours into his or her week or day. So it's an investment that will yield results today. I thought I will reap the benefit of this program in 3 to 5 years down the road. But as soon as I stepped forward into the program, my mind changed immediately.
There was so much value in the experience that the time I invested paid back so much for the energy that was expended.
The Deep Wealth experience compared to other programs is the top. What we learned is very practical. Sometimes you learn stuff that is great to learn, but you never use it. The stuff we learned from Deep Wealth experience, I believe is going to benefit us both.
I've done an executive MBA. I've worked for billion-dollar companies before. I've worked for smaller companies before I started my business. I've been running my business successfully now for getting close to a decade. We're on a growth trajectory. Reflecting back on the Deep Wealth, I knew less than 10% what I know now. Maybe close to 1% even.
Hands down, the best program in which I've ever participated. And we've done a lot of different things over the years. We've been in other mastermind groups, gone to many seminars, workshops, conferences, retreats, read books. This was so different. I haven't had an experience that's anything close to this in all the years that we've been at this. It's 5-star, A+.
I would highly recommend it to any super busy business owner out there. And Deep Wealth is an accurate name for it. This program leads to deeper wealth and happier wealth, not just deeper wealth. I don't think there's a dollar value that could be associated with such an experience and knowledge that could be applied today and forever.
Are you leaving millions on the table? Please visit www.deepwealth.com/success to learn more. If you're not on my email list, you'll want to be. Sign up at www.deepwealth.com/podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, if it added value, if you walked away with some new insights and strategies, please leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Reviews help us reach new listeners, grow the show, and continue to create content that you'll enjoy. And as we wrap up this episode, as always, please stay healthy and safe.